Assalamu alaikum. We are back again with this late night discussion. It's past 12 o'clock and it's the best time that you get some information out of Muhammad Ijab's head. So today we're going to be speaking about economics. This is something we were discussing a few weeks back, if you remember. And the first thing to note is, it is one of the miracles of Islam that the economic model of Islam, the way that it's been constructed and the framework that people built upon the prophetic narrations and the Quranic verses over the centuries, that in of itself is a miraculous feat, because there is novel information which was not available to the Greeks, to the Indians, to the Romans, to the Persians, and a unique perspective which actually is a viable alternative, which was actually practiced in the past. And of course today it is something of which we only have remnants. So let's just first speak about is Islam totally, does it have this sort of unfettered capitalism that you basically let the markets deal with everything, or is it more of a communist type of thing where prices are set and the state acts like a nanny? So let's talk about first prices and stuff, because you had some interesting information about this.
In the time of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, some Sahaba came and they were asking him to set the price in the market because the prices were going too high. And he said to them that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is al-musa'ir, the one who sets the price. So he's not going to get involved in that because he doesn't want to be held accountable on the Day of Judgment. This indicates to us that the economic model of Islam is really a free market model. But it's not a free market model that can be associated with the kind of capitalism that we're seeing today, with the elites owning, 2% of the population owning 80% of the wealth, or whatever it may be. That wouldn't be the case. The zakat system would stop that from being the case. People don't realize.
Just before we get into that, the last time we spoke, you related this to something Adam Smith said, which I thought was very interesting.
Yes, which is the invisible hand of the. The invisible hand of the market.
Yeah. So you basically let the markets.
Yeah.
Set the
very, very well known kind of economic model. Adam Smith kind of said this. He used this term. It would suggest that this very famous term, which is the invisible hand of the market, was really used 1,400 before.
Yeah. So before we get into, like you said, zakat can be a counterweight to this type of wealth circulating just amongst the elite. What are the implications for when prices are set by the state? What actually happens?
Well, this is the argument of the Keynesian economics. If you look at a Keynesian economic kind of graph and compare it with a normal supply side economics graph, you'll see that it usually makes protracted it stagnates economic growth.
Right.
The problem with a very strong capitalism is that there's boom and bust. It's a lot of peaks and troughs. A lot of them. With the Keynesian model, if you look at it on a graph kind of basis, you'll see that there's a lot of stagnation. Islam is not supply side in the same way, or capitalistic. Obviously, capitalism is something else. In the same way as as we see in the West. Because it would not allow riba, which is usury and interest, which is huge, which would have
that's what leads to the boom and bust.
Because it's like giving steroids to the economy.
Yeah.
It's like giving steroids to the economy. So it just completely fluctuates the economy. Look at the crash in 2008. You mentioned this. It's exactly that.
Yeah.
Why did the crash in 2008 take place? It took place
hyperinflation.
No, but lending. It was the inability for people to pay back their loans.
Yeah.
And if this system had not been in place, then this crash wouldn't have happened. Okay.
Yeah.
And so the same thing could be said now. That's why Islam has a very reasonable system when it comes to lending. It has a very reasonable system when it comes to usury, or lack thereof, actually, and it bans it outright, not just for practitioners of the religion of Islam, but for everyone. Because some religions, they have it only for their own kind of. You can do it with, but you can't do it with someone that's a co-religionist.
Yeah.
So it will be an outright ban, but obviously it would be incremental. Like, say, for example, if someone wanted to implement this, it would be very difficult for them to implement that straight away without breaking the economy. So they'd have to increment it down. But if they wanted to implement this kind of a law, so implementably, like this can be implemented, right? And In terms of currency, this is very interesting because now we have in the economy, since the 50s or 60s in this country in particular, is currency is based on demand and supply.
Yeah.
So the value of the currency is because of demand. Before it was pegged on the value of gold. Really, this is a question. Islam values gold and it values silver, and currency usually was typically pegged with gold and silver as well, because the coins were gold and silver coins. So potentially, that could be an area of discussion for Muslim economists. In terms of, as you know, redistribution.
Okay, and just as a segue to that, if you pegged it on something like gold and silver, and you couple that with not having interest, in which you are giving steroids to the economy, you will have. Would I be correct if I say that the growth would not be as great as what you get in these capitalistic sort of scenarios, but you get the boom and bust there, but here you'll get growth which is less in terms of its how steep it is, but it is real growth because it's not going to crash. It's actually going to it's long term.
If you look at a supply side graph, okay, all you have to look at is the peak of those graphs and the troughs of those. Or you and so, for example, if we're talking about growth, we have to look at growth per time span. So what we're talking about? We're talking about the growth in 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, 20. You could make a case, and we won't know this until it happens because we need to kind of put this into practice, that the growth will be more, but it won't be so steep. It's like someone taking some kind of medication. Okay, if someone takes ecstasy medication, you'll get happier quickly, but your crash will be more. The economy is just like the human body. You give it too much, it will get happy quickly. It will go into a state of ecstasy, but then it will crash. So if you take away these these things which exacerbate the economic effect, then it will just kind of you could imagine that it will create more kind of like a stasis. It will calibrate the economy, but that's, of course, we have to kind of put this into practice. It's just theoretically that would make sense. Over 20-30 years, you can imagine that there would be an overall net growth, actually, if you think about it, because when you're looking at charts, if they're going like this, then overall, what's the growth?
Well, it's like this rocking chair.
Right. If you're going forward, two steps forward, one step back. So think of it this way: if I'm going 2 steps forward and 1 step back, 2 steps forward and 1 step back, 5 times, compare that with me doing it 3 steps forward and 1 step back. 3-4 times. Because we're not saying that within an Islamic economic system there's no such thing as recession. I don't want to strawman the argument. Recession happens naturally because of the forces of the economy. We're just saying that it's most likely to be less recession, and boom and bust will be flattened.
And the other thing which I thought was very interesting, and this is something which I heard Sheikh Haytham first talk about this, and I thought it was a very nice way of summarizing it. The Islamic economic model is not essentially about saving, but about spending, because you can have the saving when you have something like interest, because then you don't nothing's being produced in the economy, but people are taking your money and then they're having to give a surplus on top of that. So in a way, for a spending economy is being created.
It creates the multiplier effect, right?
Because if there's zero interest, there's no incentive to save. You have to spend, right? Because you want to. That's how you're going to get the most out of your wealth.
That's a good point. Really
and what actually happens is, the poor-rich divide gets worse. Because when you start spending, okay, I'm going to spend, I'm going to build a new factory, do this, do that.
Then you're employing.
Then you're employing, and then the wealth is getting distributed.
True.
But when you are simply saying, okay, here's my money, I'm giving it out, and I'm getting interest, nothing's new being physically created for the economy through that.
Yes.
And the poor people are basically getting a loan for which they have to pay interest, for which they're being disadvantaged. So Islam, the way it divides the wealth through the spending economy is far superior to the saving economy. And you'll find the richest people in the world, they are benefiting from what? Essentially interest.
Absolutely. Gordon Brown, the ex-prime minister of this country, he said he wants to solve boom and bust. I don't know what proposition he had for that.
I remember hearing that, a few years ago.
The thing is, you really can't solve boom and bust. So long as you have a free market economy, you will have boom and bust. just like in the classical period or the medieval period, you had droughts and these kind of things, agricultural disasters,
Wars,
even human disasters, catastrophe, and all that.
Yeah.
That would have a direct impact on economy. I don't want anyone to think that we're talking about an idealistic thing, because economics by its nature volatile. What we're saying is that if you remove by necessity the forces of volatility, then you have more stability. And what we're saying is that the exploitative, usury based interest system in the society that we have, that just creates more volatility.
Yeah.
Moreover, the Quran has a beautiful part of the verse, which in Surah Al-Hashr, chapter number 59, it says, كَيْ لَا تَكُونَ دُولَةً بَيْنَ الْأَغْنِيَاءِ مِنْكُمْ. And it's talking about kind of like the war booty, or whatever you want to call it. But it says something interesting, which has generic implications, which is that such that it does not become a redistribution among the elites of you. And so it would seem to be a maqsad of some sort of Sharia, or one of the objectives of Sharia, that the wealth is not circulated among just a few elites, like an oligarchy, or worse yet, even a monopoly.
And you could also take this from the fact that Islam stipulates zakat as a percentage, as opposed to just give zakat just without a percentage. Because a percentage actually then is about redistribution, right?
Absolutely. And don't forget, zakat is done with a lot of other things, not just wealth. A lot of people think it's wealth. No, it's wealth with livestock, as we've spoken about in the live, but also things that come from the ground, like seeds and minerals, oil potentially even. Imagine zakat on oil, what that would look like. Imagine we're talking about sila, or the basically the tradable items, al-urud, as they call it in the books of zakat. For example, if a seller is intending to sell with X amount of tradable items, they're zakatable. And so that is to say that if a huge retailer has X amount of stock that they will be selling of whatever it is goods that they're selling, whether it's natural resources or otherwise, that would be 2.5 will be taken out from that. So it wouldn't allow these kind of giants to get away with kind of tax evasion, these kind of things. We don't need that much from them. We only need like 2.5%, but we can have a healthy redistribution of resources with it. Believe me, if that was done properly, we would have a redistribution in the country that we live in. Everyone's tax evading.
Yeah, and not only this, there was something I was thinking about, and maybe this is beyond both our pay grades, but there's something in terms of redistribution. So like you said, it could be a higher objective of Islam, or I think you said it is a higher objective of Islam, that you don't let wealth circulate amongst the rich. So there's a redistribution, right? So this has implications not only for the way that zakat is taken and the way that the economy is run in terms of the redistribution of goods, but also to do with micro level decisions about what is beneficial to the rich versus what's beneficial to the poor. For example, go down to a local superstore 20-30 years ago, right? You would go there and there would be 8-9 cashiers. Today what's happened is those cashiers have been replaced with machines. This doesn't help overall in terms of the redistribution, because those 8 people's jobs are gone in terms of a machine that was mass produced in a factory, and for life you are having less redistribution, because before 8 households were being fed, and now there's basically no household being fed. It's just somebody in a factory in a line. You can give that a certain unit of work that they basically did. So in a way, Islam wouldn't, okay, again, I'm just hypothetically saying, it would make sense if Muslim theologians and Muslim economists would have this discussion. Is it even right to have those types of replacements for human beings? So human rights over machine rights, right? Because that actually increases the profits for the company and decreases the wealth amongst the poor.
It's an interesting point of investigation for sure.
So it's a new area, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a new area that things like that would have to be investigated thoroughly. There's no doubt about it. But these are kind of like issues where Islamic scholars would come and speak to each other about and have discussions and produce fatwas on. The main thing that I think we need to communicate to the public about Islamic economics is that zakat is collected, and it is redistributed to 8 categories. And this is what we believe, right? Like, for example, slaves. People don't realize that slaves are a permanent fixture of. And people think, we don't live in the age of slavery anymore. We live in an age of slavery. Yes, we do. We have a Slavery Act We have human beings being trafficked. Zakat would mean that we would have to go to the areas where human beings are being trafficked and free those slaves, and we would dedicate a massive portion of the GDP of the country to just freeing people from slavery.
Well, no. I mean, look at the gangs that come in from whichever countries they come in from,
Yes.
right? And they come in and they basically have these women who are being trafficked, sadly, in places like even like London, where they have these massive debts and they have to pay. So zakat could be used to free up those women who are essentially. There's modern day sex slavery in London. There's a whole sort of thing
all
about
this
this
kind of things.
Yeah, they would be freed.
We're talking about miskin and faqir. There's two categories. People don't realize the difference between those two categories, of miskin and faqir. True that, by the way, the slave thing, some Muslim scholars say that it has to be a Muslim slave. Some say, well, that's a sadaqah would be with the other ones. And just to put the caveat there before.
But then there's also the category that about the winning over the hearts, right?
Yeah,
And which some scholars say is for dawah.
They're non-Muslims.
Yeah, and so that would include this. Yeah.
Dawah would be wafi sabilillah. They include that's a separate category altogether.
Yeah.
Which includes military spending and includes dawah actually. But
would it include community work, like humanitarian aid?
Humanitarian aid, al-faqir, miskin. They're the two first categories.
Okay.
إنما الصدقات للفقراء والمساكين.
But that's for Muslims. But this category would allow that potentially. Would that allow it?
There is a category just for non-Muslims. That's for
right.
non-Muslims.
Okay. Yeah.
That's just for non-Muslims.
So
but non-Muslims that are sympathetic to Islam. We wouldn't give money to people that want to kill us or beat us. Or try and kill, These are non-Muslims who are sympathetic that potentially could become Muslims themselves. That they're seeing us give part of our GDP as a country, or as a nation to them, would make them think that we have good intentions. And that because we do have good intentions, we're literally giving money away. And this kind of thing is allowed in Islam, where we think is reasonable, where we think is actually strategically important. Yeah, at the time of Umar al-Khattab, he took that away. He said that's no longer strategically in our best interest. And a lot of it will be guided by strategic kind of thinking. But this is a robust redistribution system within Islam. We have that. We have also the money that's acquired in other ways, al-ghanima and al-fay and all those kind of things. And we don't want there to be redistribution among the elites in that. But one of the things Islam came to protect, and it's very important as well, is the wealth of people. Ad-darurat al-khams, the five necessities that Islam came to protect. One of them is the mal of the person, or the wealth of that person, which is, by the way, a very strong point of, I would say, intersection between the liberal tradition and the Islamic tradition, because it's very clear in both traditions that wealth ought to be protected, and the government has no right to take people's wealth unjustly. The extent. Okay, the question is now taxes. Would there be such taxes for things? Now, this is a very difficult area, because what can you actually Islamically rightfully tax an individual above and beyond the zakat without it being sadaqah, without it being actual theft? And that's a very difficult question, which many scholars would have very strict and stringent arguments for that. Actually, anything above zakat is not your right.
Yeah, I mean, if we look at it,
and we're talking about 2.5%, by the way, of the wealth of your assets, not assets, and
the
your house,
for the poor
your
people.
Wealth.
In a way, if capitalism allows for this false horse tranquilizer steroid, which wears off and creates a bust, right? This injection of not taxing, and the poor will not be taxed at all. They'll have no zakat at all, because they obviously they don't have the service.
Communism is totally against Islam. I don't see how anyone can maintain the two positions. I think they would practically they would have to inkar of that hadith. They would have to reject that hadith. They would have to reject the 2.5. They would have to reject so many things in Islam. وَحَلَّ اللَّهُ الْبَيْعَ وَحَرَّمَ الرِّبَا. That Allah allowed bay'ah. He allowed trade. How could communism allow a kind of trade where free trade, right? So they would almost be doing kufr.
I mean that narration that you mentioned at the beginning, in which the Prophet, peace be upon him, did not get involved in price fixing. I mean, what do the communists do?
That's exactly what they do.
Yeah, I mean, meticulously, this price, that price, whatever it is. So I think one of the most powerful things is, rather than having, false injections through interest by not having taxes, right? And only the rich paying that 2.5% riches, and they have the surplus, right? Then you have this huge amount of
anyone above the nisab,
yeah,
anyone above the poverty line will pay.
Yeah. So you have what? A huge incentive for people to actually go and work and earn and do these things.
Yes.
Now, something's very interesting. You see, a modern example of where communism failed massively is during the time of Mao. So you had these communes, you had this land, they brought everyone together, they said you all work together, no one owns the land, we do this. But Deng Xiaoping, who came after Mao, he realized this is all nonsense, right?
Yeah, he's the one who kind of
capitalized it, right? And basically they are capitalists. That's what the Chinese communists are.
I
know, but yeah. So basically then it was like, okay, gung-ho, go for it. Private property, private incentive. Because look, it's a human thing, right?
It's incentive.
You walk into a mobile phone shop and you got one customer, one employee who gets paid £6 an hour. No matter what he does, he gets paid £6 an hour. The other person gets commission. Who's going to work harder? The fact is, when you have the Islamic model, you have the fact that their own personal interest to make profit is in line, so it's not being curtailed, so that entrepreneurship and all of that thing can go full steam ahead. However, their success eventually leads to the success of others because the wealth that they're generating gets redistributed. And the communist model doesn't allow that because it's curtailing what you can do, right? In terms of the restrictions they have. And the capitalistic model, the wealth that you're earning is yours and that's it. The redistribution is non-existent in essence.
But then there's two things here. Someone would say, is poverty conceivable in an Islamic state? The answer is yes.
Yeah.
Just like a lot of people think, well, it's very important because...
Sorry, but before that, I did say something slightly wrong. There is redistribution in the capitalistic system, but not to the same extent as Islam.
Yeah,
sorry.
For sure. But what I was going to say is that, I always thought, when people ask me about slavery in Islam, okay, well, Islam allows milk yamin and it allows slavery and stuff like that. I always think, well, slavery and poverty are in a very similar position in Islam. It was conceivable, but it's not desirable. The thing is about Islam is the economic model is very much linked to the theological model. The economic model is we will give a lot of agency to human beings to act in the right way. Yes, the government will intervene when it comes to the fuqara and the masakeen and the 8 categories that I mentioned in Surah At-Tawbah. Yes, it will intervene practically and forcefully in taking 2.5% of the wealth of people that are above nisab, etc., and other categories, not just wealth.
Yeah.
And zakat al-fitr and all of that. Yes, it will do that. But it won't take 34% of your income.
Yeah, ridiculous amounts.
It won't do that. And quite frankly...
Which is why some people, when they reach a certain threshold, they decide not to take a pay rise, or, some people are better off from benefits.
And that's well known, It's stunting the economy in this country, and it's a bit of a ridiculous, and not just this country, but many countries in Western Europe. What I was going to say is... there is a high level kind of trust on human beings to act in the right way. That's why if you look at in this country, for example, even David Cameron had to admit this, the most charitable people are the Muslim people. Because it's not just zakat, right? You have charity as well, sadaqah. You people from their own goodness giving other people money. And the reason why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not abolish poverty in the most clear way, which is that there's not allowed to be anyone under the miskin level or the faqir level, is because it wouldn't give anyone a chance to function within the test of life. That would forge the results, if you like. It would create something with the results that is not. It doesn't allow people to exercise agency of their own goodness. So poverty is conceivable in a Muslim state. We're not saying it's not, because I don't want. And once again, people idealize things. No, poverty existed in the Muslim state, and it can exist if people implement all that we're talking about.
Yeah. It
doesn't mean because something is conceivable in an economy that it's desirable.
Yeah.
Islam doesn't like poverty. It encourages against it. It doesn't like people to be slaves, and it encourages against the emancipatory discourse. But in both cases, both things are not desirable. But people should exercise good judgment in freeing slaves and giving money to the poor.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to, maybe I think that's a separate video we can do about this whole argument that sometimes people come up with. Oh well, if you have such a great model and stuff, why isn't it applied today? It's a totally separate thing. In fact, I may get there's a brother at Cambridge.
It's true. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. So I was thinking actually that's a separate topic. But the thing is that does not in any way, shape, or form take away from the argument which we're making. Is that how could someone in the desert 1400 years ago, of his own accord apparently, come up with these ideas which people are discussing centuries later and philosophizing about, thinking about, writing about, publishing about? Why is this something that is not considered by some as an extraordinary feat? It is nothing short of a miracle. How is it possible that a man who did not have, did not study Keynesian, economics and what's the other one, and all this stuff which took centuries and people in different parts of the world to come up with ideas, and even today basic things like, okay, how do we get rid of boom and bust, how do we stop this, how redistribution, all of these types of things. So definitely something that we need to look into further, because at the end of the day, the Prophet, peace be upon him, has left us with a legacy we are still living with today, and every aspect of his life is a miracle upon a miracle. So until next time, Jazakallah khair for listening. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.